Today is December 19th, and our story today is called A True Fairy Tale. And the scripture reading is from Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 5. And it says, "You, O Bethlehem, are only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel will come from you, one whose origins are from the distant past. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land, and he will stand to lead his flock with the Lord's strength, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world, and he will be a source of peace." And from Ann Voskamp's book, Unwrapping the Greatest Gifts of Family Celebration, the story goes like this. Have you ever gotten lost in the pages of a fairy tale with their castles and kings? Well, once upon a time, which was actually before time began, a story began that is better than the most otherworldly fairy tales you have ever heard. God gathered God's children and told them what would happen even before it happened. The Father King of the heavens and all the universe and his Son looked across their kingdom and saw how all the children they had made were being held captive by the dark and the sinfulness and the sickness and the badness. They knew their unconditional, unstoppable, unwrappable love had to come and get their people. So they came up with the very best rescue plan. This is what they decided. The Father King would open the back side of the world, and the Son King would unexpectedly slip right into the kingdom through a little unlikely door called Bethlehem. Remember Ruth, whose husband died? She followed Naomi back to nobody would be expecting little Bethlehem, whose name means house of bread. Many years later, Ruth's very own great-grandson, a puny little shepherd boy named David, spent many nights lying on the hills of Bethlehem, just staring up at the sea of blinking stars, his heart beating with God's heart. And then, long after King David, if you stacked one year up on another until you had a teetering tower of 1,000 long years, the Son King, Jesus, slipped into the kingdom. He was born as a baby about as small as a little loaf of bread, right there in a barn in nobody would be expecting little Bethlehem. The moment the Sun King inhaled air into his lungs, the blinding light of history slashed back the smothering dark, and the Sun King brought joy from beyond the walls of the world. And shepherds lying out in those same Bethlehem hills saw the sky bursting with a blinding star over little Bethlehem, because who would be expecting that? The Sun King did not grow up in a palace, or even have a pillow to lay his head down. The Sun King had no throne or horse. He was a carpenter with a hammer, and he wandered the countryside, fixing broken down bodies and broken up hearts, and breaking little loaves of bread to feed huge crowds of hungry people, because who would be expecting that? And the Sun King let the very children he'd made and loved slap him and whip him and nail his always loving hands to the cross. And all evil and badness across the universe laughed as if they'd won. Then they wrapped the Sun King's limp, dead body in rags and forgot him in the grave. Who ever expected the tears of all of this? But then, when no one was expecting anything from another world at all, the Sun King jolted right up in his grave, alive, and the light forever shattered the darkness. The king flung off the rotting grave clothes and rose, his perfect heart beating hope loud in his chest. Monster stones rolled, because who would be expecting that? And the Sun King walked right out of the grave, his heel crushing the snake-like head of all the evil and badness. And all the king's children in the whole universe were wooed and wowed back to life again. It's coming. The kingdom's coming in a little and small and unexpected way. The king is coming to rule the earth and make all the sad things untrue and make all the bad things come undone. We love in little ways. The big things unexpectedly begin to happen. They won't be expecting that. In little places, through unexpected people, the story is unfolding and unwrapping all around you and in you, the light overtaking the dark, and it's like you can see a new kingdom bursting in right now. How all the lit up trees and all the trees in the field will clap their hands. The story that is happening is better than the greatest fairy tale ever told, because it's all true. Amen.